Different by design. Studebaker is. Studebaker is. Studebaker is different.
Every time we make those announcements about turning off your cell phone, I remember when I was giving a talk to a bunch of realtors and I made that announcement, and like 3 minutes into my presentation, my phone went off. So sorry, do as I ask, not as I do. So I want to know, by a show of hands, who would sign up for a race car ride from Washington Street down to Western and back? I think that, see, Lauren, you got to do this. It's like a quarter of a mile. I think we could do it like in 3 seconds, so that'd be cool. Well, thanks for coming out. It's always best when there's not just me and 2 other people, so I appreciate that today. So yeah, I do live on a farm with a bunch of critters and my wife and kids and whatnot, and the 39 Studebaker steak truck that I'm forever threatening to get up and running. So hopefully this summer's the summer, right? Hopefully that's always the case. How many folks of you have had that same conversation about the car in your garage, right? Someday I'll come and show pictures of that. That's been there since the 1960s. So yeah, when Lauren called and asked me to give a talk today about something, and I thought, well, how about the architectural legacy of the Studebakers? And that's what, I don't know how many months ago you asked me that, and then, I don't know, a month ago, I'm like, oh my goodness, what did I agree to do? So, yeah, so I work for Indiana Landmarks, just a real quick PSA, otherwise I lose my key to the office. Indiana Landmarks is a not-for-profit statewide organization that our mission is saving meaningful places, historic buildings, sites, places that matter to folks and communities. And we do that a variety of ways. We have 9 offices around the state, and our headquarters is in Indianapolis. And like the Studebaker Museum, we are also a membership group. And the doors are locked. You can't leave unless you've already joined if you're not a member before you leave. So I've left some of these on the front stage here if you're so interested. It's how we survive, just like every not-for-profit, through members. We have about 6,400 members around the state and the country. Most of them are in Indiana. So I would encourage you, if you're inclined and like historic places and want to help save them, please consider joining. It's very, very reasonable. If you do join, also up on the front is a copy of our magazine that comes out every other month. You can kind of follow along about different projects, buildings that are going on, and the crazy stuff that myself and my colleagues get into around the state of Indiana. So yeah, I'd encourage you to consider that. So for today, I'm going to take a little bit of a different tact. We're going to talk about architectural legacy, and we're going to form that around the Studebakers. But I'm always one to want to set a little bit of a foundation and try and put it in some context, and then also talk about some things that are kind of happening now. So it's not just this building was built in this date and here's the architect and isn't that lovely, but that legacy that's been left by the Studebakers and some of the other industrialists here in South Bend is pretty important, obviously, to us and others, and they're still around. There's still stuff here that we're reusing. And so that's my goal for today, is to paint a little bit of that picture, take a little bit of a different take on things, and organize how Studebaker and his colleagues of the time built this city architecturally. I do want to take 1 minute, though, and honor John Stamper, who, if it wasn't for John's mentorship and connection when I was first here as a curator at Kopsche I probably wouldn't be in front of you today. And it's through John and his connection that I just want to honor this talk and raise him up a little bit, because I know I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. And also his most recent book, because as I said, after I agreed to do this, I said, what have I gotten into? I realized that like our topic today is like this thick, right? So John literally wrote the book, and I'll come back to this, but if you are interested in this topic about buildings in South Bend and their legacy and how they came to be and a lot more, I'd encourage you to pick up this. This just came out last year, and it's a really amazing, amazing book that was the last one that John wrote and was finished up after he passed away. And it's just an amazing book about the history of architecture in South Bend and the campus of Notre Dame and St. Mary's as well. So if you're intrigued by this little taste that I'm going to give you today, which is all I can do, because I thought about just starting on page 1 and just starting reading, and then I thought that might not be too enticing. So you can get some more information from John's book, City and Campus. You won't find a better source. So I talk about context, and I just want to remind us, a lot of the folks in the room here may already know this, but some of you may not, but South Bend, what gets our river, our name from where? The river, right? The South Bend River, South Bend St. Joseph River. And so it's those early settlers that brought industry. And so this context that, Studebaker and our other industrialists couldn't have built what they did if it didn't have the folks before them that actually started this city, right? And so from that little bend in the river, it gave our community and really helped us grow from a little frontier town on the river to what it became later on. There will be a test, by the way, at the end. All the dates and names that I give you, you will be asked to. Anybody know what year was South Bend incorporated officially? 1831. It became a village and then a city in 1865. And so from that time really sprang what we know as South Bend. But who are some of those other industrialists? We're certainly familiar with Studebaker. We're in the namesake museum and drive and restore the cars that they made. But there's other early industry that located around the river too that helped to flesh out sort of this architectural legacy that we do have here in South Bend. Oliver and Bissell, of course, one being that. Of course, the river, the dam provides all of that power that helps fuel that industry. Of course, if we didn't have that power, the Titans wouldn't have been able to build along the river. So these are just some different views to remind you of what that early industry looked like along the St. Joe and how different, of course, it is today, no doubt, from there. Early view looking back towards the Jefferson Street Bridge. And a few of these slides I'm putting in because we're going to come back to them. Like we're going to see some later versions of these things that the industry, that Studebaker and others allowed to be built. So I just remind you, it's the river that started it all, and that's where Studebaker kind of came to other industrialists and other folks in town, right? So they started building their industry along here. And they created wealth, right? They brought industry, they created success. Studebaker among the top, of course, and the wealth that allowed this town to grow and thrive. Of course, Henry and Clem Studebaker in business in 1852. Quick, this is another quiz. Where did they start? Downtown at the corner of? There you go. You can go down there. There's a park where the building used to sit. Of course, this is a photo of their administration building across the track south of town after they moved from that original location south of town. Another shot of the rail yard. Sorry, I have a little bit of a delay between my notes and the screen. So it's what drove that industry south of the tracks industry. And of course, you're familiar with Studebaker and how they grew. But I want to talk a little bit about some others as well. So this is their administration building that was first constructed. A lot of folks haven't seen that photo. Of course, then replaced later with the Studebaker admin building that's there now. I'll return to the architect of that building as well. There's lots of threads that I find fascinating with the buildings that were built and still exist here in South Bend, this one being among them. I like this shot. What's the difference that you pick up on this picture than what we can't see it like today? The railroad tracks, absolutely. When you show this postcard, it's like, wait, why does this look so different? It takes people kind of a second to realize, oh, there's this giant track in the way. But this is what it looked like when Studebaker first opened it. This was the view you would see from the downtown. It's a quite different experience today, of course, than then. Anybody recognize this site? A couple of you. Oliver Chilled Plow, the largest plow works in the world. Plowed in every agricultural county, eventually covered over 120 acres. The hydroelectric plant created the first electric here in South Bend. So an impact, Studebaker's colleague, Oliver. I always wondered, as I think about these names of these leaders, if they ever had like little breakfast meetings downtown, like, you know, wouldn't that be kind of cool? You see Mr. Studebaker and Mr. Oliver and Mr. Bertzel, and because they were all colleagues, they were contemporaries, and I've always been curious about if they ever had if they got together and talked about these things. So of course we have Oliver in the success of the Oliver Chilled Plow Works that eventually grew to incorporate all the ground here just to the south of this where we're at today. Bertzel Manufacturing. Why do I have this up here? Who is this, by the way? This crowd probably knows who this is. I have gotten to the point, you won't identify this, in my age, that my students don't know some of these references. I'm like, who is this guy? Why would I have Rodney Dangerfield up here? Everybody knows Studebaker, everybody knows Oliver, sometimes they know South Bend Toy, which I'll show a picture of, South Bend Bait. But Birdsell is kind of like the industrial company that doesn't get the respect. It's just lost, primarily because a lot of its buildings were lost a long time ago. And so the Birdsell Manufacturing Clover Hauler 1855 also became the largest of its kind in the world. Cast and steel skein farm and wagons, clover and alfalfa haulers, wind stackers, and automatic feeders, all things that current industry passed by. But they were also, just like Oliver, the largest in the world, just like Studebaker, one of the largest in the world, right here in Little South Bend. And it led to this architectural legacy. Here's a photo of the Birdsell Corporation's plant, really on par with what you saw with Oliver, right? And maybe not quite as big as Studebaker, but really something that was to be seen. South Bend Toy Company. Anybody know where South Bend Toy's remnant is? You probably visited it at one time in your life. Out on Sample Street, exactly. Yeah. This is not it. I'll come back to that photo. Sorry, a little out of line. Stevenson Underwear Mills Complex, 1910. Staley came to South Bend, the vision to build a factory that produced woolen underwear. Yes, we all have to have underwear. It's okay. We can talk about it. Began operations in 1855 on Colfax Avenue and then joined Staley Manufacturing. At the time, they were known as on the East Race, which was, of course, Lowell, right? The kind of the town across the way that became part of South Bend. That legacy survives today. It's an apartment you can rent, live right there in the part of what's left of the underwear mill, right? So it's a legacy that does survive. Wagon companies like Knobloch, of course, down the street here, O'Brien Finishes. You can drive down Washington Street. The remnants of this factory are still in place today. This is South Bend Lathe Works. And then Singer Sewing Machine Company, which originally started out where? Over on the East Race, and then eventually moved to, of course, Western Avenue, which there are still a couple of remnant buildings out there as well. And today there are still a few buildings left from the original Singer plant on the East Race, which recently have been in the news, if you kind of follow along. So these buildings still are around and are still impacting our city today. And there's the O'Brien, as I talked about a little bit earlier. So just anybody familiar with where O'Brien, the finishing company is, it's just west. If you go west on West Washington Street, go around the little curve at the end. And if you keep going down, there are some little remnants of that. 1878, finished material to coat buggies and carriage bodies. So if Studebaker's building the carriages, you still have to get paint from someone. And so that legacy of the Studebakers isn't just their complex. It's the feeder companies as well that fed them. It's the little town south of here that used to provide the lumber. And so that legacy is more than just their plant. It includes places like O'Brien that made the finishes and the coatings for those buggies as well. So what did that do? Come back to wealth, right? They were successful and good for them. They were good. They made money. And Studebaker spun off the suppliers, and Oliver spun off their suppliers and employed lots of people, but they made money, which was great. But what did they do with it? And that's where we'll turn a little bit of our attention to some of that architectural legacy, because it built the city. Some additional aerials of South Bend, this from the Waterworks Tower looking down to downtown South Bend. That wealth built this city over time, right? It grew and it changed. And even today, we continue to see changes in our city, of course, in modern times. But it grew this city in many ways. Some different scenes looking down Michigan Street. Are these some new images to some of you, or have you all seen these before? Some of you, yeah. It's kind of interesting to see when you look back some of these black and whites from our downtown. To the 1950s, when this was, I would say, probably when South Bend was the most built out as a city, most complete. Why would I say that? Anybody want to guess what the turning point is here just after this postcard? closure of Studebaker certainly was part of that legacy, and I would include this in a weird way. The architectural legacy of Studebaker also is the impact after its closing, and what decisions were made after that plant happened and we had the major change in our city. So yes, the wealth built the town, but then the closing also had an impact on our community. And in this image, if you think about this as our downtown in the 1950s, after a term, maybe some of you have heard, urban renewal. Many of you might remember when our downtown disappeared before our eyes. In this image, if you just squint, about half of these blocks became empty. And that's a different kind of legacy. It's not one I want to dwell on a lot, but it did impact our city. And even today, I'm going to end on with a couple of photos of that legacy also. So if you think about that legacy of Studebaker, it's both the wealth that was created through them and the industrialists to build buildings. I'm going to talk a little bit about those buildings in a minute. But also after the closure, that architectural legacy, what happened with urban renewal and that whole change in time as well when our city drastically changed. So how do they spend that money? Well, I like to group it into things like different types of buildings, which I find fascinating because they didn't just build their houses, and I'll talk about the houses, but they also built churches and civic buildings and places to gather and roads and bridges and all that sort of thing. So what do we have as far as churches are concerned? Some of you know this, but each of the Studebaker brothers built a different denomination of a church. Some of us kid around, we think it was a bet. Whoever gets there first, put the good word in for me, right? The Methodist, it's kind of hedging your bets a little bit, whether you're the Catholic, the Methodist, the Episcopalian, or whatnot, Presbyterian, but they each had a different church that they built. This one, St. Paul's, just up the street when you leave here. If you take LaPorte, it's on the corner about a block from here. St. Paul's, built in 1901. Sidney Bagley was the architect. Still around today, a wonderful church, actually still used as a church, which in today's historic building environment is a great and becoming unusual thing. And so this one is the Methodist church that was built with Studebaker funds. St. James Episcopal, downtown South Bend, another church constructed. Parker and Austin, 1894. A couple of these names are going to keep coming back, and so I just kind of pay attention to some of these architects because they keep, maybe you're familiar with this. If you have a great contractor you like to work with, you tend to hire them again. If you have an architect you like to work with, you tend to hire them again. You'll see these names of some of these firms come back around in the future. So Parker in Austin, 1894. St. James Episcopal Church, again, another church still in use today as a church, thanks and built by Studebaker funds. Come on, there we go. But I recognize this one. If you came down Washington Street from downtown today, it's still there, thankfully. Big giant pile of rock. Sits on the corner of West Washington and Lafayette Street. Designed by J.P. Bailey and constructed by Christopher Foshnot. Now remember Foshnot, because I'm going to bring his name back up again. Was built for the First Presbyterian Church. It actually replaced an earlier brick church that was on the site. So sometimes we see our historic buildings think, oh, it's the only building that's ever been there. It actually replaced an earlier Presbyterian church, which they used until they built which one? Of course, the one that's on Colfax now replaced that, and this church became a different denomination and now is currently empty. And we can take guesses about what it might be used for in the future, and it has recently been for sale. So if you want to buy a nice old church building, it's fantastic. It has Tiffany windows. I can put you in touch with the realtor because it does need a new owner. So see me afterwards. I'll connect you with the owner. And they built downtown buildings, and I put this one in because this site has also come back into play recently with a proposal for downtown. But they also built, in addition to churches, a lot of hotels. And I find this fascinating. Every time there's like a new wave of success in South Bend or an effort to kind of spur economic development, one of the first things that gets built is a hotel. Like it's a way to bring people into the town, and you see this sort of thing. And I have this in here because to the right of the building here on the screen, I don't know if I have a fancy pointer. The LaSalle Grill building was a hotel, right? Before it would turn into one of our great places. It was also used by South Bend Bait as a place before as well. It is our oldest masonry building, commercial building in downtown. It's lost some of its character, obviously, but it's in that photo here on the right. So, and there's the bookstore, right? So those buildings still exist. It was one of the first, is the oldest hotel building that we have in town, still here. And so, of course, South Bend Bates moved off to a different site later on. What about civic buildings that allowed, the wealth allowed to be built through taxation and other? Of course, we're familiar with this building, the courthouse downtown, thankfully getting a new roof, yay. We always like new roofs on historic buildings, that works really well. And a great civic anchor. What I start with that, what I come back to though is it's across the street from what noted building, of course, was the Oliver Hotel, probably one of the most lamented losses. Interior by Macy's of Chicago. It was known as one of the best hotels east of Chicago and all the way really to the East Coast. It was quite the place. So remember this location, because what happens in urban renewal and what gets built in its place is what? A new hotel in the 1960s, right? The tallest building in downtown. Another hotel that you're familiar with, it's still around, the 1921 LaSalle Hotel. Nicole, Scholler, and Hoffman are the architects of that. Another legacy building that still survives today, and today it's an apartment. So not only built as a business person's hotel, and of course, why was that helpful in this location? Those of you who know South Bend, what was right next door, right on the street here? Exactly. Raise your hand, Carl, you can't do this. Who was surprised when they were surprised when they found the South Shore tracks in the bridges that they work on? It's like, yeah, of course, that's why they were there. The business traveler could stay at this hotel as well as the one behind it, right? The Hoffman, both of which are now residential units. You can live in them. And why is this kind of connected to Studebaker? Well, the only reason you have business people hotels and you have a South Shore line coming into South Bend is the people are wanting to travel here to do business, right? So now maybe Studebaker certainly didn't necessarily build this hotel, but if it weren't for the success of that company or the others, you wouldn't have a reason to have the South Shore line or these hotels to bring the business people in to stay at them. So it's a little bit of a different way to think about that architectural legacy. So here's a modern, a little bit pixelated, sorry about that. If you've not visited someone in there, find somebody you know and visit their apartment, because it's really kind of a cool conversion and a great reuse of a building, both that one and the Hoffman behind it. So what about, I mentioned civic things. Transportation is a big part of our community, and I'll show a photo here in a couple minutes of some connections with that. But we also have some amazing bridges that get built, and I would posit that it's because of the leadership of some of the community leaders that we wanted to build beautiful, right? We didn't just build a bridge, we wanted to build these amazing Milan arch bridges like the Jefferson Street Bridge here. It's about 1875 was the first bridge. I showed you that earlier vision that had the steel truss bridges over that. Those got replaced. This bridge was opened for use in 1906. Anybody want to guess how much it cost? It's okay, I don't throw anything for wrong answers. It's good. Carl, you want to guess? 100,000. Oh, see, that's why you're the professional. 125. Good guess. I'm not sure we could even get an engineering study done for $125,000 a day. But even by the 40s, there was some settlement and cracking. Of course, it goes across the river there, but into what, of course, Howard Park, our first park. And what's in Howard Park? What was built in Howard Park by Studebaker? The fountain, which is now in Leaper Park. We'd like to move things around here in South Bend, by the way. But of course, the City Beautiful movement was really important, and Studebaker saw and brought to South Bend that beautiful fountain that went in Howard Park. And you wouldn't just put any old bridge into that new park. You'd want something like the Jefferson Street Bridge, this concrete, beautiful arched bridge that graces that location. And here's a different image of it over the river. It's just really a gem here in South Bend. But one that you might not realize unless you happen to drive around on the riverside is this one. Anybody guess? Twickenham Bridge. And it's a 1929 bridge. I love this connection. Another long time South Bend kind of Mishawaka connection by Reith Riley Construction. Right? So these legacy companies, they still have an impact on our town today. The engineer was William Moore. This is a wonderful bridge, and people they drive over it, which is great, and they might notice the spikes, but until you get underneath it, you kind of miss the real beauty of these arches underneath this bridge. And so check it out sometime. So let's move to some other civic buildings. I mentioned the 3rd County Courthouse, but this is one of my favorite stories, the 2nd County Courthouse, that was built originally facing Main Street and pivoted 180 degrees. Anybody ever seen the photo of them pivoting this building 180 degrees? I've lost count, and I don't really want to know how many buildings I've moved because it's just a major headache. But moving this building 180 degrees with the logs and the mules that they use to do it is just phenomenal. So this is actually an image that it was shot when it faced on Main Street. I pause because when Studebaker and colleagues built, they wanted to build well. And they had a pride in their town. I mentioned the fountain and the bridge. Like, they wanted to bring in architects, but not just any architects. They wanted to bring in architects from Chicago and other places in the country to design these buildings. And so the 2nd St. Joseph County Courthouse was designed by John von Osdell. Now von Osdell was known in Chicago. He had other buildings that he designed. This is a city hall and a county courthouse in Old City Hall, the courthouse in Woodstock, Illinois, 1857. And so Osdell was the one that designed our 2nd St. Joseph County Courthouse. Unfortunately, because he did a lot in Chicago in the early 1800s, what happened in Chicago in the early 1800s, mid-1800s? Mrs. O'Leary's poor cow that we blame on that may or may not be true, but it's a great story, burned down. And so actually our legacy here in South Bend of this building is quite profound because this is pretty much one of only a couple buildings that survive of Osdell's work. And it's a really, really wonderful Greek revival building. And so I know none of you have ever had to visit here for official reasons. So maybe you should get a small ticket and go to a small claims court or something. Anyways, you got to get up to the 2nd floor courtroom sometime. And we're just thankful that that building has been restored and is still here and is saved as a courthouse in our community, along with, of course, our 3rd courthouse right behind it as well. So along with civic buildings and things, I love this story. McConnell and Sons from Buffalo, New York, designed our little soldier and sailors monument. Now, maybe if you've heard me talk before, because I just get a kick out of this, in the 1960s, we built what downtown to serve as our county offices, the county city building, right? Off of Main Street is the paddock to go down into the jail cells under the county city building, right? This little monument sat where that entrance to the jail is off of Main Street, so it had to move. That's all well and good. What is this? This is a Civil War monument. And so the dude on the front is, at the very top is a Union soldier. Can you see it okay? Take my word for it. He's pointing. But when they moved it, they turned it 90 degrees. And so the Union soldier is actually pointing, like charging towards the Union. It's kind of an odd thing. But I suppose it was a conversation, well, if we turn it so it faces south, it'd be like they'd be attacking the courthouse. So that was probably not a good idea either. So just pay attention sometime. It's kind of a fun story on why the Union soldier is pointing north. It's because it's not there from its original. But this also was the same company that did the Soldier and Sailors Monument in Indianapolis. So when our leaders did things, they did them well. They brought in von Osdell to design the courthouse. They brought in the monument company that did the monument in Indianapolis to do our Civil War monument. They looked to architects like H.H. Richardson when they started to design their homes in the Richardson Romanesque. This is Richardson and some of his known styles of architecture. This isn't a stylistic talk, but it is one that we think about when we talk about Tippecanoe New Place, because it is really, when you look up at architectural style books and you look at Romanesque architecture, and you think about the design by Henry Ives Cobb, it actually thinks about H.H. Richardson in his precedent, right? Like they're looking and bringing in folks that are known. Cobb is known nationally for his designs. He has other things that he's done in the country. But who was the supervising contractor for Studebaker for Tippecanoe New Place? Charles Foshnot, a name that I mentioned before. They do good buildings, why not hire the best in your own town, right? So Cobb is known for some of the things like the Potter Palmer House in Chicago. And then what do you know? What do you look there on the bottom right? The Cable Ransom Residence in Chicago, 1885. Does that look a little familiar? What do you know? Where do you think Studebaker said, I like that building, build me one like that, only bigger? So I'm back to Rodney Dangerfield. Because the poor Birdsell Mansion, I really think is the one that just doesn't get respect. People drive by it and they're like, what is that giant pile of rock? Well, it's the Birdsell Mansion built by the son of the founder of the Birdsell Corporation. And I would say is of the three in our West Washington district, it is as important as Copsham and Studebaker's Tippecanoe New Place and Birdsell. I mentioned Birdsell was known as its largest of its kind in the world for what they made at the time, just like Oliver and Studebaker was as well. And so Birdsell's son built this building in 1898. Another name, Austin and Parker were the architects. Austin did a lot of buildings in South Bend, and he'll be coming back around in a minute. Austin and Parker were the architects that supervised the building of Copsham as well. So you can't just talk about the legacy of one industrialist, just Studebaker, because it's a small town, right? And they're all building big buildings. And who are they going to use? They're going to use the same people. Because if you could build one giant rock building, you can build another giant rock building, right? And they can do it well, and they've survived. And so the Birdsell Mansion, I still put up there as probably it is one of the top three kind of crown jewels in our neighborhood here in the West Washington district, and one that needs some more attention. And here's an image. It was featured at the time in an architectural magazine because of its beautiful design. I wanted to show this in here as well because another piece about this house that people don't realize is when you're on William Street, William did not go through at the time they built this house. And so Birdsell actually had a large side yard, just like Copsham and Studebaker, not quite as big, but it had a yard. And then when South Bend put William Street through, it became a corner. So if you go back and look at the old Sanborn maps, you'll find that out. It's like, oh, that's why that house looks a little bit scrunched on its corner, because it used to have a yard over time. And you can kind of see that in the bottom right here. That's the Port Cochere. You can see that there's their driveway heading out towards Colfax. Well, that only works if there's no street in William, right? So just a little fun fact. You can play that when you're doing South Bend Architect Trivia Pursuit in the future. They also built schools, but this is always sad for me and why I can only do these talks every once in a while because I have to get therapy afterwards. We built schools as well, right? And we wanted to build schools well because we want to educate, but so many are gone. Franklin School, Coquillard School, Madison School, which is now still on Lincoln Way, right? This is one that still survives, which we're thankful for. The high school, South Bend High School, which what a pile of brick that is, amazing. And it sat where? Anybody remember? No? Nobody went there. Sat where? South Bend Central. So they actually bought one of Studebaker's houses and tore it down to build Central High School, which I think is kind of interesting. They hired William Ettner as the architect. They built Central High School in 1911. Why is William Ettner important? Well, we don't necessarily know his name, but we should. He was a noted architect for schools from St. Louis, was widely published in architectural journals. This is amazing. Did over 500 schools in 115 towns in 29 states. So when the city leaders built, they wanted to build well. And they wanted to bring in firms that could design well. What is about this picture, though, that's kind of intriguing if you've ever paid attention to Central High School like us architectural nerds do? Can you ever see, like, what's different when you look at this postcard versus when you drive by it today? It does. They always conveniently forget to show that this is like facing the back of St. James that I showed you earlier. It's a detail lost to history about why they cited it that way. Part of it was because the other school they had to keep in service while they built the new one on the same site. They were going to turn what's the alley into a road. That never happened. And so we have this really wonderful historic school building that now you can actually live in. So this legacy continues. It is an apartment building that faces an alley. It's just a weird fluke of history. Here's one of Etner's other school buildings. This one's in St. Louis from 1909, so just a couple years before Central. I think if you squint, you probably see some similarities about those, right? So Studebaker built the admin building, which you're probably familiar with. Many of you have been through it. Some have helped us clean it out. The person that's most responsible for it right now just walked into the room, so I have to be very careful about what I say. So we're familiar with this. Solomon Beeman, architect of this building. This is noted, and I've not been proven wrong yet, maybe someday, probably, as one of the first poured-in-place concrete buildings of its size in the United States. There are other poured-in-place concrete buildings in the country. They're smaller. This one's of note. We've actually found photos of them building this building, and it's a pretty remarkable process. If you think about at the time, they didn't have these big giant pumper trucks like we do now just to swing the concrete in. It was ramps and wheelbarrows and dudes with shovels. So it's pretty amazing. So Beeman, born about 1853, died in 1914, started in New York City. Richard Upjohn, another noted architect, was where he was working at the time. A lot of noted different buildings that he built around. Once they were done with the admin building, though, Studebaker built the next building downtown, which was JMS. So this is not for the Studebaker Corporation. This is an office building. And Beeman did this one as well. A little bit different style, right? Moving into the terracotta, but it's the same sort of construction. It's a solid concrete core, post and beam type of building clad in terracotta. It's a remarkable building built by the Studebakers as an office building, and today you can live in it. It is still around. And as a matter of fact, my daughter and son just moved in there last weekend, so good for them. So there's Beeman looking very happy. Some of his other works. When we built, we wanted to build well. We wanted to bring in the architects that knew how to build buildings. Well, if you have wealth, you got to have some place to stick those dollars, right? There's some before and afters, earlier pictures of the JMS. So we built banks. This is Schettner Witzhum, easy for me to say because I'm German, in Burns, 1924, American Trust Bank building downtown. Many of us know it today as what? Cafe Navarre. Wonderful place to eat. And then, of course, in addition to it, to the north. So a legacy building built as a bank, still serving our community today. Coming back to the name we've mentioned already, Austin and Chamblot. Austin, new partnership, Chamblot in 1929 built the Tower Bank building. If you've paid attention to this building, the west side of it looks a little bit blank. You're like, why is that? That's because 1929 they opened the first of the proposed two towers, and then promptly we moved into what? The Depression, the crash, and the second tower that's drawn in here was never completed. So the reason their blank west wall on that tower is because there was supposed to be another one right next to it, but for the crash, never happened. But Austin was involved in this in 1929 bank building. A building, sometimes we forget about buildings. We drive by them all the time. We don't even realize they're there. And then you look at a picture of it and you go, oh my goodness, is that in South Bend? It is. It's the federal office building, right? And federal courts building. And again, you've probably never been in it, but if you ever have an opportunity to get in it, the lobby is amazing. And it's a building that if you were in another town, you would be like, oh my gosh, what an amazing building, but we tend to drive by it. When you step back and you look at this photo, you go, what an amazing 1930s building right here. Again, Austin and Chamblot, 1932. Architects that started cutting their teeth working with Studebakers and Olivers and others, and then moved on through a successful career.
What street?
Main Street at Jefferson. Yes, it was built as a post office and then converted to federal office building, but thank you for that. That's why I'm always worried about doing a talk to these sort of groups, because y'all know way more than I do. I just have the clicker. And then we have buildings like this downtown, the Farmers Security Bank, 1915-1939, the Chicago firm of Perkins, Fellows, and Hamilton. This is really an amazing building when you stop and take a minute to look at it. Again, we get used to driving by them, but you got to look up, and not just to watch the Peregrine Falcons swoop down at you, but also to realize at the very top is this amazing Sullivan-esque detailing that exists up there that the firm Perkins and Hamilton put on this building. It's a really wonderful legacy building from a bank standpoint downtown. So I come back to this. Things change. I talked about hotels, and I talked about urban renewal. If you paid attention, whoop, I'm a little out of order on my slides and my notes. I apologize. Well, we'll talk about this one anyways. Recognize this one? City Hall. It's in the same block, right behind the Morris, that recently the redevelopment just expected some proposals for a new building to come on this site and the waterworks, right behind the Morris. That corner is proposed to change again, right next to LaSalle Grill to the west there, right? I go through all that just because our legacies change. The streetscapes of our communities change. I would prefer to have this amazing building, but it's going to set to change again. That's what's just on my mind. This is maybe not an architectural legacy, but it'll be a new infill building coming into that site, and you can of course see LaSalle to the east there. I mentioned urban renewal when I like to say our collective leaders lost their minds, but that's okay. It happened around the country where we decided we needed to do something different, and that's a whole nother PhD study, I'm sure. But South Bend suffered dramatically in our downtown, changing our community, and it's not only South Bend, of course. And I mentioned this as an architectural legacy because things change. This is the famous Boston City Hall downtown where they changed it from the top left to the top right. And I mentioned our downtown changed dramatically from that sort of low-rise type of situation to lots of empty space and different types of buildings than we have today, right? And where they took the Oliver Hotel and replaced it with the Tower building, which has had, I don't know, I've lost track of how many different names it is now. I still haven't found the name of that architect. If anybody knows that, let me know. It's interesting. But I think there's a study somewhere, if any of you would like a second career or need a PhD topic, of which buildings they chose to target as part of their urban renewal. Because I showed you City Hall, it was down pretty quick. They took down Oliver pretty quick. And if you start thinking, you look around the town in the 60s of which buildings were targeted first, some of it was because they were considered old and obsolete and they're trying a different path and they had different visions. But I think there's a little bit of a nugget there about which buildings were taken down first, including the Oliver Hotel, as a little bit of a statement. But I digress. Another legacy of Studebaker in our town are the roads. Studebaker was a big proponent of the Lincoln Highway, as was others in our community. To bring Lincoln Highway through South Bend was important to Studebaker because why? You need cars, right? And Goodyear needed road wheels, and so it's no surprise that Studebaker's legacy includes bringing roads through our community as they were improved, like the Lincoln Highway. And that's not what I wanted to do. Let's try this button. And so there it is, from the first coast-to-coast paved highway from New York to San Francisco right through South Bend. If you're downtown at the corner of Washington and Michigan is a plaque, because at the corner of that street intersects the Michigan Road, which was from the Ohio River up to Michigan City. So at that intersection, we have this amazing connection between north-south traffic and east-west traffic, and certainly a legacy of Studebaker to bring those through our community. As part of that other piece of the 1950s and 60s that we're familiar with, which of course the interstate highway system, another legacy that impacted our town, as the highways took people outside of downtown. And that's a whole nother conversation, but it does lead to sort of our conversation about building beautiful and bridges and how we maintain and restore what we were given as our legacy. I already talked about those. So what's next? Some things that are kind of part of our legacy, right? I mentioned urban renewal, and I wanted to just show a couple next things. This has recently been in the news. The Century Center, we're all familiar with it. Some of us may not have attended prom there. I don't know about that. 1977, Philip Johnson and John Burgee built this building. But it was part of that effort after urban renewal to reinvent the downtown. What are we going to do? Studebaker's closed. Urban renewal has happened. We have lots of space. And they brought in what? Another named architect. It's that legacy of bringing in folks that matter, that have experience, that have note. And of course, Philip Johnson, one of the most noted at the time, was brought in to do Century Center. And there it is. What are the challenges with it? It cuts off our downtown from the river. It's a problem from an urban standpoint, and it certainly is now feeling its age, having been built in 1977. For those of you who aren't familiar with kind of the parlance of historic preservation, the typical cutoff for a historic building is about 50 years. Y'all can do the math in your head quickly. We're there. And so a conversation about what happens with Johnson's building it's on the bubble. It's there. Well, we continued this legacy. In 1982, they built a Helmut Jahn designed First Source Bank and hotel building. We all can debate the architectural merit of it. My point in this conversation is legacies continue. We bring in noted architects, Philip Jahn, very noted German architect at the time, to build legacy buildings that still survive today and used. And that's certainly the case with this one. Now, this will really point you out as an architectural nerd. Anybody know what other local buildings Jahn designed? And I'll use local within about 45 minutes. It's okay if you don't know. It's very obscure.
Michigan City Public Library.
Who said that? Carl, you get the star. Yeah, Michigan City Public Library. Another building, though, that the challenge is it cuts off their downtown from here, in that case, the lake. You can't get from downtown Michigan City to the lake without going through the middle of the library, which is a little bit awkward from an urban, kind of, like a circulation standpoint today. But that's another one. Of course, I believe he also designed the athletic building at St. Mary's. So how does that next? So those were a couple of big buildings on the bubble, but what is another one that I'm working on that has this legacy? I mentioned that they have suppliers that, if it weren't for Studebaker, wouldn't exist. O'Brien Paint, and Woodland would still have trees if it weren't for Singer Sewing Machine, because Woodland provided the wood for Singer Sewing Machine, for example. And we have this building. Anybody know where this one is? This is always like, how many blinders do we have on when we drive down Michigan Street? 700 block of South Michigan Street, just past Sample, is this wonderful building. Bless you. That's what happens when I go into that building sometimes, by the way. So this is, and I'll close on this one, the Indiana Lumber, and now we know it more as the UAW building, Indiana Lumber and Millwork building, 700 block of South Michigan. Trust me, it's there. You should drive by it. If you're familiar with the Center for the Homeless, it's across the street, right next to the amazing Greek Orthodox Church that we also should be very much paying attention to. That is an amazing church building. Indiana Lumber was a company in South Bend. It was huge. It owned everything for this building, and to the east, it had a rail yard, a rail siding. They could unload the boxcars of wood, and they sold. Think about Indiana Lumber and Millwork as the Lowe's or Home Depot of its time. It ended up having about 5 different locations here in South Bend and Mishawaka, and this was their headquarters. There's their store. And so the first floor was their showroom. I know it's a little bit pixelated. Was their showroom where you could buy windows and millwork and doors and flooring and lumber and blah, 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 right? That you go there, you buy your stuff. When you look into some of the buildings that I just showed you and you look who provided the lumber, it came through Indiana Lumber and Mill Company out of this location. It also is a connection because Austin was the architect, is the architect of this building. And who owned Indiana Lumber and Millwork? Starts with an F. See if you were paying attention. Foshnot was one of the proprietors and owners of the Indiana Lumber and Millwork Company. It's a very small town. So Indiana Lumber was in business. They owned a lot of land around there. I love this event. At some point, the second floor there, they used it for the Westinghouse Cooking School. How fun is that? By 1940, so this is built in about 1929 or so, and by 1948, It was sold and being used by the United States Army, which is why the second floor trim is all painted Army green. It's fascinating because who was the Army working with then, of course, would be, what's the connection? UAW, Bendix Local Number 9, who ended up with the building and has been a union hall since they bought it and for their 25th anniversary in the 1950s. So there's a couple images of the building on the left-hand side when Bendix Local 9 first bought it. And this ginormous blade sign on the front, and then a little bit smaller blade sign to the right, and a 1950s remodel for their anniversary of the founding. It's a fascinating little story. We get used to driving by these buildings. We just don't know, we don't think about them. But it is a great little building. So we can find these advertisements. What do you notice on the bottom right? The Tower building. These threads are thick in South Bend, and the more you read into it, the more fascinating it is. The other building you might recognize of Austin's was the Jefferson School up on Sample Street there. So this is the building Indiana Lumber built. It's had a lot of changes on the first floor, second floor, obviously, but the terracotta is just a wonderful composition. I'll close the description of this building on the second floor because Foshnot and Austin and others were very smart business people, and their legacy, like Studebaker's, still survives. They made a lot of money. And they did that because they were smart. And so on the second floor of this building in the front is a big square room. Why would you have a big square room in a lumber company? It's a pretty good size. So it's called the plan room. Contractors could bring their blueprints. They didn't have little fancy things. They'd have big rolls, and they could do what they call their takeoffs. I need 300 2x4s. I need 62 double hung windows. I need millwork. Oh, by the way, you can go downstairs and buy that from the salesperson on the first floor, and we'll make it in our shop back behind to the east. It was a remarkable, what we call integrated, vertically integrated company, and the building is still there today. UAW owns it. Landmarks, I'm working with them presently on a study of the building to figure out its next life. That big blade sign that I showed you a picture of was wonderful and fun, but it also just started pulling away the front facade. So if you look down the front, it has this amazing bow that should not be there. So stay tuned, trying to tie in legacy with next steps. Things continue. We try to look for new uses for the legacy of the Studebaker buildings and the industrialists that built them. Our town went through a ravage of urban renewal. We lost a lot, but we have a lot left. And our hope is by kind of bringing awareness to that and having folks look at them, remember them. Oh yes, I drive by that all the time. I didn't know about it. Kind of bring some awareness so those legacies continue. And I'll just close. I encourage you, if you like this, I just encourage you to pick up John's book. I don't get a royalty, but you should. It's very well done. I encourage you to find your bike. We think that fat tire bikes are a new thing. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's a car tire on those bikes. Anybody remember these? Maybe somebody has one of these Segways. I just encourage you, even if you don't buy the book, open your eyes, take a tour. You'll see these buildings. Studebaker built them. He worked with his colleagues to build this city, and we still have a lot left. So I appreciate your attention today, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that I don't have the answer to.
Different by design. Studebaker is. Studebaker is. Studebaker is.